Hey everyone. Alright, so I want to make a quick video about, or not about, but for beginner computer programmers. And really what I want to do, I want to stay in between 5 to 10 minutes. I want to give my 5 quick tips, or I'm pretty sure it's going to be 5, but they're just quick tips for everyone who's starting programming to kind of get a general sense of what it is, because when I started programming, I already knew about programming when I went to college, and I didn't like the way it was being taught, as in, they were teaching you certain computer programming languages, but they weren't teaching you the concept of what programming is in general. So I just didn't like that, So my first quick tip, I'm just going to make this short. My first quick tip is this. Don't look at computer programming as a set of commands or functions. Look at it as a problem-solving tool. That's all it is. You're just trying to solve a problem, and you have a tool, and it allows you to solve a problem. That's all it is. Look at it as a problem-solving tool. And when you look at it that way, then later on when you know, let's say, 5 programming languages, then you will be able to choose a specific one out of those 5, let's say, to solve a specific problem, because different problems require different type of solutions. One type of problem needs more speed, another problem needs a different type of sorting algorithm, and different programming languages have different functions for those. Some will work faster, some will work slower. So once again, you just gotta look at it as a problem-solving tool. Second thing is that you shouldn't mix. You should start from one programming language and stick with that. If you're just starting out, just start with the one programming language and stick with that. And I would personally recommend to start from C. That's what I did. But you can really start from anything you want. You can start from Visual Basic. You can start from PHP. You can start from anything. C is just my preference. I think it's good to start from that because it's pretty challenging, and you learn all the basics and all the fundamental stuff, like the pointers and everything else, and it's just good. For me, it was good. For you, it might be better to start from Java. I don't know, but the bottom line is this: that you have to start from one programming language and don't incorporate everything else together, because that's just going to confuse you. You got to learn the syntax of one programming language and learn all the functions of it and how it works, and just get a general sense of the whole thing, And I'd say dedicate at least 2 years, at least 1 year, but I would say 2 years dedicated to one programming language, just so you know it fully, or as fully as you possibly can. So once you do that, then you can move on to another programming language, and that's what I did. When I moved on to, I think it was PHP. I knew Java, and then I moved to PHP, and it took me a month to learn, to just get a sense of how it works, and just learn how the functions interact, how to make the variables, and all that small stuff. The reason is because I already knew the concept of programming, and besides that, I was already comfortable with one programming language. And the thing is that all programming languages, they share a lot of similarities. There's different syntaxes, there's different functions, and this and that, but most of the stuff is very similar. So once you learn one language, learning another is not that difficult. So definitely do that. Third is please keep your code clean. There's a tendency, when I was starting the program, there's this tendency to overcomplicate code, because in a way you want to program, you want to write a lot of code, and you get excited. You're like, oh, I just want to write a lot of code. But it's good in a way, because that means you're passionate about it. But what's bad about it is that you end up with a spaghetti code. And what a spaghetti code is that it's very difficult to understand at the end. When you write a code and you try to come back to it to maintain, or you want to debug or do whatever else you want with the code, it's very difficult to do that. So try to keep it very clean. And by clean, I mean use understandable variable names, but don't make them too long. Your function names, once again, don't make them too long. It should be like this. When you're looking at a page, you shouldn't be scrolling to the right all the time. So what I mean by that is that it has to be very short. Because sometimes, you have this conditional statement that goes on and on and on and on. You have to break it down. If something is too long, you have to break it down. If something is too complicated, you have to break it down. That's rule of thumb. So if you see something is getting way too complicated, you got to break it down. You got to think of another way to do it, because if it's really that complicated, it's gonna come back at you later on when you're trying to debug it or connect it to some other program or whatever else you're trying to do. So that's one thing. And so those are three things, and hopefully I can remember the rest. If not, then I'll just I'll just leave it at this. But one of the other things that I wanted to tell you is that yes, a lot of beginners, they don't test their code before moving on. And what I mean by that is this: when you're writing a couple of lines of code, please test it, please debug it, please make sure it works. Because here's what happens. You write a code and you think it works, and you're confident it's going to work because you think that's what you wrote. But there's so many times when you write something and you meant to do something, but actually does something else. And later on you find that out, and it takes you so long, and it's it's a tedious process. And it is a tedious process because you haven't checked it when you wrote it. So every time when you're writing a couple of lines of code, just go over it, make sure it's right, debug it, test it, make sure it works, okay? Especially when you're doing a huge project and it has like thousands of lines of code, and it's just, at the end, imagine if there's like a little syntax problem or there's a logical problem. It's going to be very difficult to find later on. In the beginning, it's very easy. So just do that, try to write and test, write and test, write and test. With experience, it's gonna be easier because you won't have to write 5 or 10 lines of code and test it. You might, write 30 or 40 lines of code and then test that because you're confident that the rest of the code is gonna work. I mean, because you have done it so many times. So that's that. And my last, the very last tip is this. This is not really for beginner computer programmers. This is really for people who are trying to make a decision whether they should get into programming or not. So here's my advice, okay? This goes beyond the scope of programming. It really relates to life in general. But I would say this: if you don't love programming, don't get into it. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to save you money and time. Really, that's all I'm trying to do. Because a lot of kids from my college, they dropped out. The reason being is that they thought that programming, they heard from somewhere that computer programming, computer engineering brings you a lot of money. Just heard it from somewhere, found it on a forum somewhere, and then they just applied to computer engineering school. And so they, went to the first class and second class, and then all of a sudden they dropped out because they couldn't handle it. And the reason is because computer programming is not just, it's not in the movies, you type a couple of things and you break into the system and get all the money. It's not like that. I mean, it takes a lot of time to go over a code, to think about the problem, to plan it out, and then write a code and then go over it and make sure the code is clean. I mean, it takes so much patience, it takes so much time. It's overwhelming at times. You have to really, really love it. You have to really love, not programming, but problem solving in general. You have to love it in order to enjoy programming, in order to get a job and not get sick of it after like 40 years, and be able to constantly develop. And that's only going to happen if you love it. And as I said, it goes for anything. I mean, you can't really become an architect, and you have to love it. I mean, there's so much to it, And I mean, if you don't love it, then why would you get into it? Money shouldn't be your first reason. You know, it shouldn't be the incentive. So don't do that. And I know I was gonna say I know I was gonna give you 5 tips, but my last one really I think is really important is the planning. Okay, planning when you read a problem, don't just jump into writing the code. It's not right. I mean, it's always gonna fail you, and you're always gonna get mad at the end. I've done that. It's not good. When you're reading a problem, try to understand the requirement. I know it sounds very cliche, but you know this is true. You have to do this. You have to read the when you get to the problem, try to understand the requirements, what it wants. Try to draw a chart and try to see the data flow, where one thing goes and where it ends up, and how does it change. You know, try to connect stuff. Try to see it in your mind. Try to plan it out. See it very, very clearly. Once you have the solution in your mind, you know exactly how to solve it, then proceed to programming it. Because if you don't do that, it's going to go back to the messy code, you know, because you're going to like be solving it as you're writing it, and that's not good. You're kind of winging it, and that's not good. It's not planned. You have to plan it first, and because when it's planned, then you'll have a much clearer code, much organized code, and it'll work. And that's really the most important thing, okay? So that's all I wanted to tell you. This is really my first video, so I'm going to be doing much more. I'll have different types of videos, which is going to be, you know, programming related. Some of them are going to be tutorials, some of them are going to be educational, some of them are just going to be like this, you know, me talking about a certain experience that I had, or about programming jobs or anything else, you know. And if you have any ideas, definitely suggest. I'm open to new ideas. And I have a lot more stuff on my website, so please check it out. And please stay tuned for my next videos. Thank you.